Hello, everyone. Steve Westman. Welcome to the special Audiophile Roundtable, a conversation with Master Engineer Steve Hoffman. Hello, welcome. I'm really excited today. Steve Hoffman's here on the Audiophile Roundtable. Let's bring him in right now. There he is, Steve Hoffman.
Hey, everybody.
You're here. You did it.
I'm here.
I wanted to give a shout out to your son Daniel for helping you out on the tech side. So we got that covered. So I really appreciate that, Daniel. Thank you so much.
He left.
He'll left. So how are things in LA? You got the kids at home now. School's out. So what are you doing? What's up?
It's raining. Everybody's cranky because it's the holidays. Happy holidays, everybody, by the way.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I don't have much plan. I mean, this is my, I'm on my lunch break today, so this is fun to do this. I appreciate your time. I know we've been going back and forth for a while now. Maybe I want to start off. I know I'm curious to know. I mean, I know a lot about you. Been doing this for a long time as well. Your career. I mean, you started off, I believe it was MCA back in the 70s. Like, how did this all happen or in the 80s? But how did this all happen for you? How did it all start for you? Because I think you had like a communications degree or something.
Absolutely did. I was in, sorry, I'm hoarse because everybody in LA is sick. So am I. I was in radio broadcasting in high school and it was a really great job, and I wasn't making any money. And one of the record company reps came in and said, "Hey, you want a job at MCA Records?" And I said, "Sure. How much does it pay?" That's all I really cared about at the time. And he said, "More than you're making here." So I said, "Okay." So I jumped over to the other end of it, and it was interesting. And I found there that they had a giant catalog that was unmined, and I wanted to mine it. So I suggested that we begin a reissue program there, vinyl, called Collectibles. And that's how it began. I was only an administrator. I was just an administrator. I designed the packages, wrote out what the songs were, who the artists were, Buddy Holly, Bing Crosby, Al Jolson, jazz, oldies, and I handed it in. And about a month later, it all came back, a lacquer to listen to, the liner notes in the artwork. And I can remember when I heard the test lacquer for the first time, I went, wait, this sounds horrible. What is happening here? Why is this one Al Jolson song sound really good, and this other Al Jolson song that was recorded in the same hour sound horrible with echo and reverb? And so that's when I made the fatal choice to walk on out to the vault to find out what was happening there. All that was happening was they didn't care. They were just pulling the easiest version of everything. And so I started making myself a pain in the ass that way. And that's how it began. I've been that way ever since. A pain in the butt. This is wrong. You're not doing this right. So they let me.
But growing up, I think when you're a young man, like you're Daniel's age now, you were into guitar, you're into music. So I mean, you obviously had that gift or that ability back then. So I mean, is that when it really started? You really realized, listen to the Beach Boys or the Beatles or all those bands. Like where was that inspiration?
Well, I was an only child, and my parents indulged me. They really did. And when I was 3, I had my own record player and I had my own records. I knew how to not scratch them, and I knew the songs I liked, and it wasn't all about Yankee Doodle Dandy. I liked rock and roll, and I started enjoying the hits on the radio and who were the artists, and were they English, were they American, and then the Beatles hit, and we were all swept away on that wave of English greatness. And in college, I was a psych major to begin with, if you can friggin' believe that. Psychology major. I didn't want to spend my whole life analyzing other people, it was just, so I jumped over to, mass communications, and I was a music minor. God, this is putting me to sleep. Come on, Stephen, ask me something else. It's like blah, 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 my life, blah, blah, blah. My God.
Well, people are
Nobody
interested
cares.
in,
Not even
no,
my parents cared.
we care to know. I just want to see, how it all began. So I mean, then okay, so I mean, great. You got that musical gift, which is amazing. You can play guitar, piano, and and so now getting into, you're in the 70s and the 1980s, MCA. I mean, that's where you, like you said, you got your first start. Like, how did that? Like, what went on there to get that gig?
Well, here's what happened. I was the mail guy. I delivered the mail, not in the mailroom of Universal, but in the mailroom of the accounting department at MCA Records, which was not a glamour job. Coming from being on the radio in Los Angeles and making $1.90 an hour to now making $5 an hour, but I was in the mailroom of the accounting department. I was in charge of handing out the pens and the pencils every month, things like that. Cleaning the Xerox machine, that was a challenge. How it had all that black ooze. Anyway, so my girlfriend at the time worked in the copyright department for the late Ken Scott. And he hated her and she hated him. She left the job. She left me. And I said, hey, I could do that job in the copyright department. So I said, hey, Mr. Ken Scott, he said, I'm not going to hire you. You're. I said, no, we're no longer together. He said, okay, come over. So I walked across the street. So I was a guy now who designed the labels, who the artist was, the name of the song, the publisher, how to license each song, all that sort of thing. And then they borrowed me in the pre-production department, which meant we brought in the tapes and we assigned each song a master number, and we wrote it all down, and we made sure that the songs were in the right order on the albums and the artwork was right and everything. And then this great guy, Vince Cosgrave, he came in and he said, they hired me to make some money on the catalog. And I said, me, I'll work with you. And 3 weeks later, Vince Cosgrave got bumped over to VP of marketing. And that just left me. There I was in his office. And I was in charge. 20 albums a month.
Wow.
That really almost gave me a nervous breakdown. I had no help. I had typed it all out myself. And so that's when I started creating these packages. And fortunately, one of the very first ones I did was Buddy Holly for the first time anywhere, which the initial order was 1,000 copies. The second order was 150,000 copies. So I was in.
Wow.
That's how it started.
Wow. Wow. And then I want some of the viewers who don't know some of your musical background, I want to get into this as well. You probably recognize this album here, huh?
Yeah, of course.
So tell us about how this came about. You have track 1 on the Pixies Bossa Nova album, Cecilia Ann. How'd that come about? That's incredible. I actually listened to it on the train on the way in today as well. And I definitely think that song should have been on Pulp Fiction, by the way, during the Vinny Vega car ride when he had, I think, Uma Thurman in the car.
Yeah,
right?
I wanted it to be. That would have been Easy Street.
Easy.
That opening guitar crash at the beginning. That's me.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's me. When I was working for Marshall Blonstein at Dunhill Compact Classics, he let me have one album a year that was going to lose money. He's very good that way. He is very good that way. One album, anything you want, you compile it, we'll license it. One year I did Chris Montez, The More I See You, and Let's Dance. Ding, 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 ding. Anyway, that actually made money. But this year it was going to be obscure surf classics from the Downey Records label. Known for Pipeline by the Shantays, the Rumblers. Anyway, I unearthed a bunch of old surf songs and I compiled this album of old songs. We licensed it. the boss named it Surf Legends and Rumors, mainly Rumors because no one ever heard of any of the songs. And I wanted a strong song to lead off this album. I wanted a real strong one. So I decided to create one with my office mate, Charles Frosty Horton.
Mm.
And so we went home one night and we banged out a surf song. We recorded it in my living room with the microphones. I played the drums and the bass. I played the drums. He played the bass live. Then we overdubbed, me on rhythm guitar, he on lead guitar, Cecilia Ann. I put it at the beginning of this surf album, not thinking anything of it. It came out, sold 9 copies in the United States. However, in England, whoa,
You're huge in England
over there. I'm huge over there.
Yeah.
Really? So they licensed it for some small little label over there, and all of a sudden, we had 100,000 units going out the door in England. And the next thing I know, the Pixies are on the phone and they want to cover the song. So they asked me a crucial question: who's the publisher? And of course, never published it. It was only meant to be this kick-ass opener of this old surf album. I made up a name, the Surf Tones. Everybody thought it was old because it's, we wanted it to sound old. So anyway, the Pixies wanted it. So Frosty and I consulted, we published it, and the next thing I knew, it was on their album.
Wow.
And the money started rolling in. Then the next thing I knew, it was in this film called Kicking and Screaming. It was over the opening titles, not the Pixies version, our version.
So that movie, is it a soccer movie? Was that the one? Which one is this Kicking and Screaming?
It was about college. It was a college film. It had the guy who was in it, this is not interesting to anybody. The guy whose name I can't think of right now. He has red hair. He was going to be in Back to the Future, but
Eric Stoltz.
Yes, thank you,
Eric Stoltz was in Pulp Fiction, so he was in that one of the scenes with John Travolta.
Yes, he was in it. So anyway, the movie, then the Pixies box set, then all the reissues, and every time it's released, we get money. But that's not why. It was only to make a good song.
So that was 1990. So my personal question: do you still see royalty checks since that time?
Oh yes,
today, even today. Nice.
Yeah, you got BMI and publishing royalties. When anything by the Pixies comes out in, I don't know, Australia, so whoa, there's a bump in the money, or England, or anywhere. It's just.
Do you just get these magical checks in the mail once in a while? That's what happens.
Every quarter.
Nice.
BMI. It's just, it wasn't about the money. It was just trying to get a good song for my surf album, and it just
love it.
Morphed.
So check it out, Bossa Nova, the Pixies, great album too. I mean, it was been reissued a bunch of times. Even Mobile Fidelity took a stab at it years ago.
We got money for that too. Yay! Mofi sends me money. That's a laugh.
There you go. Okay, so now you're mentioning this here, and I put it up here. This is DCC Compact Plastics. You started this with Marshall back in what, 86? Would it have been? Is that when you guys started that?
He began the company.
Yeah.
And in the middle 80s, I guess.
Okay.
And I mean, now that was a dream job, just come in and take over the handling of it, issue anything you want. The problem at that time was CDs were fairly brand new, and record companies did not license out. It was very hard, to get anything. But my boss, Marshall Blonstein, he used to be the head of Ode Records, and his cousin, Lou Adler, as you know, founded Dunhill. So it was easier for us. So we got some really great songs, and I helped him propel the company up. we bought the Shelter Records catalog. So we got Leon Russell and Phoebe Snow and whoever the heck else was on Shelter. And that was really good. And then in 1992, it was that fateful day. Chad of Acoustic Sounds sent Marshall way out west, and Art Pepper Meets the Rhythm section on vinyl, and I was just happened to be walking by, and I said, "Wait a minute, what's this? Whoa, look at this! Chad's doing these." So I said, "Hey, so could we?" And that's how that began. But Chad was the inspiration.
Nice.
Absolutely.
There you go. Well, now I was going to get into that as well, because we'll get into just, what your thoughts are of the, the pretty
Yep.
much the vinyl community now and the audiophile community now, industry, and what's going on with UHQRs and Mofi and all that. But and then, so again, DCC, you guys are there. Did it till 2001, right? Is that when it sort of shuttered?
Yeah.
Shuttered.
Yeah.
Did you go from DCC then back to this Audio Fidelity after right away? Is that sort of how this worked for you?
2 years.
Okay.
Regrouping. Yeah. As always, it was a struggle to get a major label to license us an entire album. I mean, why would they? Usually what happened, we would write a list. Here's what we would like to license for audiophile, LP, and CD. And we would write them this whole list. The major label would grab the list and go, okay, let's release all these. So it was like, hey, that's our list. So it was very hard, for them to help us out until we found Ralph Caffel at Fantasy Records up north. They said, sure, we'll license you Creedence Clearwater Revival. Sure, we'll license you, Miles Davis. Sure, well, anything you want out of our catalog. So that really broke the ice with, all of our little small label endeavors. Then, of course, when they sold the label to Concord, that all ended. And, the majors always want to do it themselves. And I can understand that. They want to make money. But the only problem is up until fairly recently, and I'm sure you know about this, they used their own engineers and their old ways and, didn't sound audiophile.
Yeah.
But now I guess they've hipped up and, they're using Kevin and, Bernard now. And so now they know what they're doing. So now it actually is audiophile product, and that's a good thing.
We can get into that too. Right now, I truly feel, and I mean, please tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, we're probably hearing some of the best reissued audiophile pressings right now that are coming out. And I know when you and I were going back and forth, we know Acoustic Sounds or Analog Productions, and maybe we'll get right into this. Do what we call the money shot here. I know you wanted to talk Asia today as well. You did post something like that on your thread in the Hoffman forum. So I, let the folks know that, you did a remastering of Asia back in the 80s on CD, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
That was the very first CD thing I ever did.
Wow. And it was Asia.
Yeah, it was Asia. Yeah.
Amazing.
It's my choice.
Okay.
Asia, Who's Next, and Poco Legend. Those were my 3 choices to, I don't know, what's the word? Initiate the MCA Records CDs. And, of course, oldies and the Mamas and Papas and Buddy Holly and Bill Haley and, whoever the heck else we did. But, for modern artists, it was those 3. And it was not easy to even get those 3 because, as you may or may not know or may or may not care, it was in the artist contracts that if the price increased, they got more money. So all these contracts had to be renegotiated with The Who and with Fagan and, so that took a while, to make them understand that, this is the future. Ironically, now we're back to records again.
I love it. Well, you knew that was going to happen because you did post a thread saying,
Oh,
"Oh, Westman's going to talk about vinyl." So here we are. We can
oh
talk
yeah.
about vinyl. I love
You know, back in 1993, Wheels of Fire by Cream and all those early gold CDs I did. We wanted to do vinyl. Nobody wanted it. We couldn't get 150 pre-orders, not 150, in order to make it worth our while. Even in the audio fidelity era, vinyl joy was just not really there yet. I don't know what happened. That's what I was going to ask you.
yeah.
What happened recently to change that?
Well, I mean, I think
You
it's.
tell me.
I'm going to tell you a lot to do with COVID. I mean, COVID changed everything in the
COVID.
industry back in 2020. People are sitting at home more, had more time, and hey, let's go on the internet. Let's look at these YouTube videos. Let's look at the vinyl community. Let's look at the Facebook groups. Let's go on the Steve Hoffman forums. Let's get more involved in this. We have time to do it now because life isn't just passing us by. We're not just worried about work. So we've seen a real uptick in vinyl. I mean, as you probably know, vinyl last year sold more for the first time than CDs since 1986. So, I mean, we're seeing an uptick there, and it's still exciting. I mean, back during the COVID time, Mofi, had a lot of Mofi was selling a lot. You couldn't get any of their stuff on their website. It was always sold out. And then of course we can talk about it too. I mean, we had DSD Gate. What are your thoughts on that? Did you know that was sort of happening with their
No
digital
comment.
process? Yeah.
No comment. Sorry. I'm not
Yeah.
going to talk about a competitor, even though
Yeah.
I'm not, actively competing,
Yeah. Yeah.
Carry on.
So I mean, that's what happened there. So, we've got, going back to, I wanted to go back because I hadn't asked you already, was the whole Asia thing. So, I mean, that was your first CD. I am assuming that was the original tapes back then that you would have probably used. No?
No. It's complicated.
Yeah.
Here's the deal. Asia, and of course, nobody knows this except maybe 5 or 6 of us in the world. And now you're all going to know this. Asia was mixed in a peculiar way in sections. So a song like Josie, maybe the intro, then they stopped and there was an edit. Then section number 1, then they stopped, then there was an edit. Now this is with full fader automation. They still were so, I don't know, anal retentive about it. They were perfectionists. Each section was mixed individually and then strung together to make a song. Now, when you get your headphones on out there after this is over, you're going to be able to hear some of those edits go by. Now that you know that they're there. By the time that I got around to it, like, what year did my version of Asia come out? 83 or was it 84? I don't know. I can't remember. It's right around there.
I want to say 83.
Okay, 83. Asia, and then who's next? And yeah. By the time I was working on that, it was unplayable. Each edit had oozed out and the pussing out. Some of them oozed out. The others dried up and fell off. That tape was unusable. So a guy named Dave Hernandez over at MCA Whitney Recording Studios in Glendale, who's actually the one who actually worked on this, I just sat and watched, frightened. He said, okay, well, this is on a crappy Ampex 406 tape, no shelf life. It's going to go bad. We can see it happening right now. I'm going to make these edits. So what he did, every piece of splicing tape he removed and he cleaned each edit. It took weeks. Cleaned each edit while I sat there watching, munching on a sandwich. Be careful there now, David. Because I didn't want to go near it. So when we got one song strung together, we copied it. We made a 1-to-1 backwards, to help the transients. Patched one machine into the other machine directly, no mastering console. That became the master. A master is what you can cut a record from. If you can't cut a record from it, it is not a master. It is a work part. So that original work part was marked WP, and it was sent along with every other tape of who to Roger in 1984. That went along with the actual cutting master that we made, which we marked master. What remained in California was the ABC tape. Now, the ABC tape was what they used to call at ABC Records the EQ. Now, it's not an EQ anything. It's just what they called it. What it was a copy made for ease of record cutting, no EQ usually. Or if there was an EQ on there, it was like a half a dB at like 8K. That's it. Those were used to cut lacquers. Anything from Asia that you've ever heard other than the original cut was cut from that ABC tape. And that ABC tape was used to make production masters for the rest of the world, for Australia, for England, for Japan, for Holland, for Germany. So that's a copy of that EQ tape. Now, someone's going to ask, well, why don't you just use that EQ tape rather than screwing around and making a new one? Well, there was a problem with the ABC EQ tape. It wasn't a major problem, but it was a problem for me personally. It had a high cut and a low cut on the tape. It had no EQ. It had a high cut and a low cut. It cut hard at 15,000 cycles, and it cut hard at 50 cycles. And that drove me nuts because we're making a CD here, not a phonograph record. You don't need to worry about that. So I didn't want to use it. So we spent about 20 grand making our quote master, and that's what I used. And I don't know who used that afterwards. When that tape went to Roger in 1984, along with everything else, the ABC cutting master, the ABC EQ, was left at MCA because they had to cut records. They cut records. Even in the 80s, they cut phonograph records and they made production copies from that ABC tape. I have no idea what happened to that tape. For all I know, it's charbroiled by now, but maybe you know what happened to it.
I don't know what happened to it, but I do know that when Acoustic Sounds did their latest Asian, I'm sure you know this as well. It was a copy that Bernie had made when he, I guess, first mastered the album back in '77, and it's a non-Dolby EQ'd copy.
So, why do you suppose he would do that?
You tell me. You're the engineer. Why would that happen?
It's very possible that is the ABC EQ. For all I know, it is. I don't know. All the ABC EQ tapes, in other words, the cutting masters from all their top albums, they all had the ABC legend on the box. It said ABC Records on there. So any original writing on there would have been obscured. So it's possible that is the tape that he's talking about, although I don't think so because it had that top end cut on it. And I don't think Bernie would have really done that if he was making a vault copy, as it were. So maybe he liked the album and he made a copy of it and he just hung on to it all these years. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I have spoken to Bernie, and that was one of his favorite albums he's ever mastered. Was the
There you go.
77, so makes sense. Yeah,
he made a quote protection copy, and a lot of engineers did that in those days. And when he wanted to play the album, that's what he played. Because nobody knows like a mastering engineer the kinds of compromises that have to be made when you when you cut a record in those days. So he wanted to hear the whole thing, so that's a good thing.
Have you had a chance to listen to the UHQ?
I haven't heard it. Okay. No. Now here's my question to you. What's the deal with Asia all of a sudden after all these years? Asia was out like when I was working on it in the 80s, like nobody wanted to hear Asia anymore. Okay. Now all of a sudden it's Asia. Or is that just on my forum and on the internets.
Well, it
Asia is
depends.
the thing.
Yeah,
It's not a well-recorded album. It's an averagely recorded album that I
see,
had to struggle to get to sound good.
that's interesting that you said that, because I was under the impression for years that it was actually well recorded.
Well, I mean, it is, compared to, Bachman Turner Overdrive or something like that. It's very close mic'd. It's very hollow sounding. It's very, instruments are very compressed in it. When I originally got my ABC album of it in 1977, I thought my record player was broken. It was like it had no top end whatsoever. And it was, it was like, I love this album. And I guess we must have played it every single week for 2 years, but it was not a sonic showpiece. That's for damn sure. I mean, it didn't show off my unit at all. So I'm just wondering, why is it a sonic showpiece now?
Well,
Is it, because everything else sounds so crappy now that now Asia is starting to sound really excellent? Or I don't know. What's the deal?
Well, I mean, I think that's something that, Acoustic Sounds obviously got the licensing for it, and is reissuing the entire catalog at 45 RPM on, from the original master tapes, and that's what they're doing at 45 cut. It sounds great on the Clarity vinyl.
Yeah. How's the rest of the catalog sound? Because those were not audiophile albums. They were very averagely.
And that gets into my next question. So I mean, let the folks know that you also did a mastering of Katie Lied.
Lied.
And now this is the whole thing. Please tell the viewers, like, this whole DBX thing, is that going to be a big issue when Acoustic Sounds reissues or Analog Productions releases their Katie Lied at 45? Do you feel it will be a big concern? Why is that?
No, because a guy like Kevin Gray has a DBX machine, and he'll just plug it in. And
Bernie's cutting this one.
Bernie has one too.
Okay, so it won't matter.
It's not a big deal. The problem with Katie Lied is it has no mid range whatsoever. It's just it's very hollow sounding. Now I like that sound. It sounds very 70s, whereas the 80s is all mid-range like this. The 70s, is very lack of mid-range, but you have to give it a little help, so it sounds, which I'm sure he'll do, as I'm told he did on Asia. It sounds really good, right? Okay.
It does sound really good.
Okay. Especially compared to everything else that we've been hearing over the years from the 80s, Phil Collins. Now Asia sounds really good. Now it's a relief to hear it, but in the old days, believe me, it was like, what happened to your tweeters, man? There was nothing up there.
But do you think that's because the equipment's gotten better?
No.
No? Okay.
Oh, our equipment or...
No, the equipment, like, let's say the end user, us as listeners, buying our equipment today, our record players, our amps, our speakers. So that would pretty much mean that because we're getting these UH carts today, they're going to sound great because of the equipment. We're a little bit different times.
I mean, Asia was mixed at the Village, right? So they had these big old horn monitors in there. So you have this gigantic horn, which is all 5K squawk. So everything that's going to come out of there is going to be mid-range light, because those monitors are not telling you the truth. They're very mid-rangey. So everything from that era has that lack of squawk, like Hotel California had that lack of squawk also. What was the question? Sorry, Stephen.
Well, I mean, just with Katie, we're just talking about
Katie Lied,
like that, right? But Katie Lied in terms of the DBX, you say because there's a DBX encoder, it shouldn't be a problem. And Bernie cuts it, and it should sound. Do you feel it will? I mean, will you listen to it? Will you listen to these new reissues at some point and go back to your mastering and have a sort of an A/B?
If you send me one, I will.
I can possibly do that.
You know what? Send me a CDR of it.
Do a Steve Hoffman shootout on the show. That would be pretty cool.
Do a needle drop.
There you go. So you mentioned Hotel California, the DCC. I have it up here. There it is. You remember this? It looked familiar?
I remember it.
Okay.
I remember it well.
Why do you remember it so well?
I was crying. I was
Why?
crying working on it.
Why?
Crying.
What was wrong with it?
Well, as you well know, obviously, from asking the question. The very first thing that was wrong with it was it came from Criteria. They used the shittiest Ampex mastering tape that had begun to shed, so it couldn't be played. So one guy said, I know what we'll do. We'll put some talcum powder on it and we'll transfer it in sections. And I said, you're not going to put talcum powder. That's not going to do anything. So fortunately, Kevin Gray, to the rescue once again, calls up Ampex up north and says, hey, we got Hotel California sitting here. We can't play it. Can you do something about this? And they said, yeah, UPS us the reels and we have a special secret technique. We'll UPS them back. And I said, I'm not UPSing the master tape of Hotel California to Ampex. And then I said, well, the way it is now, it'll never be played again. So I said, I got it. We'll FedEx it. So that's what we did. We just FedEx it, reels up there. 5 days later, they came back and they played. The guy said, they'll about 2 weeks and then they'll go bad again. I said, 2 weeks? Okay. So then we listened to it and it just sounded, it was like, I said, oh God, they wiped off the whole top end of the whole album. We're screwed. No, that was just, so we pulled up the Criteria safety copies and those wouldn't play either, but we got at least, 1 or 2 minutes out of it before our heads totally gummed up with black sludge. And they sounded like that also. So I said, okay, we got to EQ this thing to sound good. So that's what we had to do. Long story short, we need to add a lot of EQ to that. If we added a little too much EQ, it sounded strident like the old LP. If we added not enough EQ, it sounded too bass heavy. So, I wanted it to sound natural sounding, and a lot of mastering engineers have this, well, we'll just add top end to everything. And, that will make it sound good. But no, it just makes it sound artificial. And so I decided not to add any top end, but we discovered that if we removed enough of that low oomphy sound, everything else fell right into place. So that's what you hear on the DCC, on the LP, and on the gold CD. You hear no EQ added up there, only EQ removed from the low notes.
So I'm assuming then you never done a comparison with like the latest one step that Mofi put out.
No, why the hell would I ever do that?
No, I'm curious to know if you ever do that with your own stuff. Never, huh?
Never.
Okay.
No. Someone told me they love the Mofi. It has more life. Someone else told me they ruined the Mofi. It's all this treble shit on there, man. What did they do to? So it's all system dependent. Look, I'm one of those guys who bought into their thing in 1979. All your records that you own in your collection now sound like shit. These new Mofi records are going to sound really good. And I believed it. Everybody believed it. And we bought them. What I didn't know at the time is just jack up the treble and, kill the low end and
the happy.
Yeah, make it hollow and it'll sound good on your crappy record player. And it did. And they sounded great. And I got rid of all my older, original versions and I kept those. And then the more I upgraded, the more I didn't like the way they sounded. And the more I thought, oh my God. And then I remember comparing the master tape of a lot of songs that I was working on for DCC Compact Classics to the original Mofi LPs. What did they do? It's like Vince Guaraldi, Jazz Impressions of Black Orpheus. The master tape sounds wonderful, but the Mofi LP was all this treble, and I couldn't understand why they did that. And it's like, look, I love euphonic sound as much as the next audiophile idiot. Believe me, I love that sound, but look, you have a record from 1980 that sounds pretty good. In fact, I'm sure that most of you are discovering that old phonograph records sound really good, right? Am I wrong there? I mean, old
Well,
records from the
I will
50s and the 60s, and
that,
when you hear them now.
and we're seeing a real uptick too, in a lot of the original records out there. They're going
I
up in
mean,
value. They're in big high demand these
yeah,
days as
because
well, because they do sound great.
they sound good because these mastering engineers in those days, they knew how to cut a phonograph record. And now you have a lot of vinyl releases that they're afraid to make them sound like the old days, and now they sound very euphonic. And that's okay, except what if your preamp is also euphonic sounding?
Right.
What if you have a lot of vacuum? What if your amp is? What if your moving coil cartridge is adding all this air up there? I mean, how much air do you possibly want on your phonograph record? This air is where the pops are and the ticks and the crackle.
Mhm.
Am I ranting? Sorry.
No, we do rants on these shows all the time.
Okay,
So
rant.
I didn't. So this is the thing. I mean, I think we can conclude today that the equipment today is so much better that these records that are being reissued are
Far
obviously
superior.
outstanding because of the equipment that we have, right?
Sure, a lot of those old records are happy accidents. The RCA Victor living stereos that I happen to have, thanks to Tom Port and Better Records, every original of every one they ever released back in the 90s when I was going crazy. I wanted all of them. And some of them sound, of course, wonderful. Others sound not wonderful, but then you have to find the matrix number to find the ones that sound wonderful. And you have to read the RCA Bible. Well, this matrix number is not going to sound good. Don't get that one. This one. But side one sounds good, but side two of this one sound, I hate that stuff, but that's what you have to do. Anyway, when What's His Nose was working on his classic LP reissues, I was looking over some of those EQ notes in the old RCA EQ notes when they were cutting those original records that now cost $500-$600 each. Those EQ notes were, treble was 5,000 cycles. Mid-range was 1,000 cycles. Bass was 100 cycles. Those were their EQ points. Everything above that and everything below that is gravy. Those were happy accidents. They sound good now because they didn't touch the top end. They didn't screw with the low end, only with basically the mid-range, to get it to sound right. When you hear a multi-channel RCA living stereo album from 1959, you hear the 3-track and it sounds okay. It sounds nice. But sometimes when you hear the reduction mix that they made to cut the record, now that sounds fantastic. Why is that? Some magic happened there in between the mixing of it onto 2-track. That magic is there, vacuum tubes and otherwise, that is not on the original 3-track. And some of these reissues, it's a shame that they're not cutting with that original version, because sometimes the multi-tracks can sound lackluster. There was a John Coltrane at MCA. There was only one John Coltrane session that was ever on a multi-track. It was live. Was it live at Birdland? It was recorded by Robert Arnold at Capitol in New York on the 3-track machine, and I thought, John Coltrane 3-track, wow. So we played it, then we synced it up with the John Coltrane LP cutting master, and we played that, and that was so far superior in every possible way. I know you're looking at comments. I can't see any of those. Am I being asked anything?
Well, we will. I was going to go, and that was the thing. I mean, I'm going to go to that in the last part of the show, okay. And I will ask you as well if you've got some extra time. I know we only talked about an hour, but I think there's a lot of questions, a lot of comments, and I definitely want to get to some of those as well. Okay. You should be able to see the comments there somewhere.
No, I can't see anything.
Yeah, but what I'll do though, Steve, I'm going to be able to. I'll be able to post them anyways, and we can go back and go from there, and we can read them. We can definitely read them off the screen here, and I mean, there's been a lot going on. So I thought you actually were able to see them, but
Nope, I can't see.
here's some viewers. I mean, Steve's mastering always have the magic mids, and that's the thing. Obviously, I think what I've heard today, you've been really consistent on the fact that you're not worried about you're more worried about those mids and the highs. It seems you're not a big fan of the highs. Would that be something I would be right on saying?
There's highs and then there's highs as they occur in actual real life. I mean, look, here's an example. There's an album that I loved, John Coltrane and Paul Kinochet, is that, or is it Chet? Paul Kinochet, the jazz saxophone guy. Anyway, there was an album they did on Prestige called Catton and that album, I love that album. That's a Rudy Van Gelder Overload special. The extra bonus tracks that I unearthed of Paul's playing at an earlier time, like early 1950s, that I added onto that album sound wonderful. Wonderful. RCA ribbon mics. They make a saxophone sound like a saxophone. By the time of Van Gelder, those Neumann microphones, why the old engineers love those German Neumann mics, they have a top-end rise that begins about 8,000 cycles and it rises up until, way up there. So the old engineers on their old gear love that top-end rise because it made everything sound good. But now we have that top end on everything, on all of our, we have it on our cartridge, we have it on our speakers, we have it on our amps, everything. So unless you can control that top end, it's not going to sound natural. I mean, if you ever hear an actual saxophone, you know what it sounds like. If you ever hear an actual trumpet, it's like, it's not overloaded. I can remember sitting in a Mexican restaurant, the Sagebrush Cantina in Calabasas. Who's eating in there? Show of hands. Come on. They had a strolling mariachi band in there, violin player, a guitar, acoustic player, that giant thing. They go boom, 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 and a trumpet player. They sat by our little area and they were all playing. When the horn guy came in, whoa, it was 80 times louder than everybody else. And I said, where's Van Gelder when you need to bring that guy back in the mix? But there's a way to bring it back without overloading it. And, some of these old engineers, they didn't know how to use Neumann mics. So, it's a sound we're all used to. It's a sound we love, the sound of, a Blue Note. And it sounds weird without that overload, but it's that's a microphone.
So if I was to describe I'm going to describe what I hear from your mastering, and maybe I'm completely maybe I'm out to lunch. Everyone thinks I am anyways. So, I mean, that's the thing. But I would say your mastering from the stuff that I have, smooth, warm, very detailed would be something that comes to mind. Would you agree with that? Is that what you're trying to achieve, or
nope.
is it just okay?
Nope.
Okay.
No, I don't want it. There's nothing smooth and warm about. I mean, I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I don't want everything to sound like Asia. I really don't. However, I don't mix the stuff. Whatever it sounds like on there, whether it's Creedence or Paul McCartney or the Eagles or Elvis Presley or Frank Sinatra, I just want it to sound like there's a human being there. What I do, I don't remix. I hate remixes. I hate, I used to.
I was gonna ask you that because I think you've done remixes in your career.
Oh, sure.
I think you did. You did the Ray Charles Greatest Hits was a remix, if I wasn't mistaken, right? Yeah.
Yep. I've not always used those in my later Ray Charleses because, it's hard when you do a new mix like Pet Sounds. It's like, oh, there's an oboe in there. I never heard that before. I'm going to bring the oboe up. No, if Brian wanted the oboe up, he would have had it up. He didn't want the oboe up. He wanted it to sound like it sounded. Now it sounds good, but it doesn't sound like it sounded back then. I mean, the Mona Lisa, I like the way it looks. But if you shine a bright light on it, it's no longer the Mona Lisa. It's like, oh, scratches and cracks and everything. You don't want that. You want to show it in a good light.
So I'm gonna know. I probably know the answer to this. So we know the last few years we've got this something called MAL software that Abbey Road and Giles Martin and Peter Jackson using to basically remix and separate all the Beatles instruments on those albums. Thoughts there?
Wrong guy to ask about that. I hate that stuff.
There
However,
you go. I knew the answer already, didn't I?
No, I heard. I mean, I have them.
Yeah.
All the new ones, and I heard something on there. No, not the song something. I heard an early one and I said, I like that snare. I like that snare and I liked hearing it, but ear fatigue sets in about 3 minutes because there is no dynamics left. What they do is they separate it out, or if it's an 8-track or, whatever, they have the individual instruments, then they squash each one individually, then they put them all together. Once they squash them, I'm out of there. It's like, I don't want to hear that. If you want to squash it, you squash it all together in mastering. When you don't squash each individual, it's like, have you ever made chili, homemade chili?
Love
you don't take each ingredient and highlight it. No, you put it all in the pot and you simmer it for hours. And now it starts to taste good. Once you separate the ingredients, you're in trouble. You're highlighting all this and it sounds good. And it's like, whoa, I never heard that. Whoa, the bass guitar in this is really good. But after a while, I go, okay, I've heard it that way. And why are my ears hurting? Because there's no dynamics. Not that there were any dynamics on the original records anyway. There weren't really, but I could go on and on, but I won't.
Got a question here. Rick's V Spinner, he says, the best I've ever heard is Tull's Aqualung sound is the DCC CD.
Thank you very much.
There you go.
Thanks, Rick's V.
Comments?
That was an exciting album. We licensed it from Chrysalis in 1993. How long did it take? 7 years for that thing to come
Why
out?
so long?
Because they kept sending us the production copy from the United States that was an EQ copy of the EQ copy that they were using in England. I didn't want that. I heard that already. I wanted the original. Does the original not exist anymore? Just say so and we'll go away. So very late. It was the middle of the night and I got this call on my answering machine. Hello, is Ian here? Ian, who the hell is Ian? Ian Anderson? Yeah, I got what you want. Sending it off. Let me have your home address. And he said, okay, it's like 4 a.m, but he didn't give a shit. So it's like, okay, Ian, send it. So about 2 weeks later, they arrive in this box and I, just loose in there, just
not packaged,
around, probably X-rayed. It's like something. Opened it up and oh my God. Aqualung. Wow. There it was. I'm getting an actual chill right now thinking about that. I was very excited about that. Had a lot of trouble in there. The last engineer who used it did a lot of damage to that album. There's things you don't want to know about. Anyway, we listened to it and it just sounded like shit. I mean, it just, it was like Hotel California all over again, except there was no bass. There was no bass whatsoever on that thing. It was like, so we just, I got with Mr. EQ, Kevin Gray, and we sat in there and we screwed around with it. And all of a sudden I said, let's run it through some layers of tubes. And, it's been all these years. What's another, month or so? But the boss was eager, to get it out. So we did it. And I'd say in about 4 or 5 spots in there, we had to patch it with the US EQ copy in one spot, the English EQ copy in another spot, and in one spot, the LP. You'll never hear it because Mr. Kevin Gray put them right in there, and even I don't even know where they are anymore. But that's what you have to do to get it out. You know, you don't want to sacrifice a whole album for one, you know. So we made it work, and it was a challenge, and I'm happy you like it.
I know there's a lot of people, I mean, on the comments, well, you know, before this, when we first started, we're asking what your favorite album you ever mastered. I know I've asked you this before, and you said, well, Stephen, you know, I've done so many, but I will tell you, just from talking to and doing some research on you, if I was to basically guess, one of your top ones that I think you really are close to is probably be Aqualung. That's the reason why I asked.
Aqualung's up there. You know, I love that album. As a youngster, I loved it, and
so it's sentimental for you as well. And then, of course, having to work on it, you got to work on it the way you wanted to sound too, right?
You know, and Ian Anderson loved our version of it. He said, "I can finally crank it now, and it sounds good. What did you do?" He said, "What did you do?"
So,
said, well.
So that's one. Okay, so I mean, they did that. They recorded that one. Is it Basing Street? I think it was in London or something.
It was in Morgan, wasn't it?
Okay, so, but it was in the church.
Morgan.
It was in the top floor of the church where the Led Zeppelin was on the bottom when Led Zeppelin was doing their fourth album or something. It was just a terrible.
It's not so much where they recorded it; it's where they mixed it. You know, that's the deal. You know, you want to go back, remix it, like what's his nose. You know, Steven Wilson, he remixed it, right?
Yes.
Okay, you can remix it. Yeah, but you want the synergy of the original to sound good. You know, that's it. You know, the original is the original. There is no other original. Now, saying that, yes, I remixed Nat King Cole, and I remixed a little bit of this, and I remixed a little bit of that, Ray Charles, but those had to be done because the original mixes were really horrible. You know what? Watching my head here, I look like David Crosby post-transplant. I swear to God, I'm losing my hair. And
that's why you got to do this. See, I did this 20 years ago now.
No, it's my son's unflattering camera. Or do I always look like this? Anyway, go on. What were you saying?
So I mean, there's been a lot of praise about your DCC catalog. I wanted to ask, and I know I did this on one of my shows a while ago. ERC came out with The Doors self-titled, and then you had come out on the Steve Hoffman music forums about this whole Lido tape thing. Can you explain this whole Lido thing again to us?
Yeah. Is this interesting to people?
Yes, it is. I can promise you it is.
Lido tapes.
Because I didn't know much about that term. Then I see it all over the Hoffman forums, like Lido. Okay.
Well, I opened my big mouth once. All Lido is Electra EQ Cutting Master. That's all it is. The original mixes by the Doors, by our friend Mr. Botnick, are wonderful mixes, but they must have confused the original mastering engineers of the time. So what Electra used to do is they made a, quote, duplicate, but with all of the EQ moves. So they reduced the top end, they added some low end. Mr. Botnick's early mixes really don't have much low end for some reason. You know, his monitors probably. So they added that. So when you hear Strange Days, the version I did is a compromise between the sound of the LP, i.e. the Lido tape, and the sound of the actual master, which is much sharper, much brighter with hardly any bass, which I believe was the way that one of the LP reissues sounded a couple of years ago. And someone said, this thing has no bass. And well, they use the original tape. So I have to give them credit for using the original tape, but they could have helped the low end a little bit. You know, everybody's taste is totally different. So the original Doors album was, as far as I know, I could be wrong on this. No, Jesus.
You warned me about that.
Yeah. No original Doors album was ever cut from an original Sunset Sound master. As far as I understand it, the Lido tape was used for every single cutting, and copies of the Lido tape were used for recutting in the later years, because the Lido tape started to be trashed. It was on that crappy Scotch 211, from the late 1960s. It congeals, it starts to sweat, and the oxide starts falling off of it. And once that happens, it's over. So what I did, what I was gonna do was remix it and just not tell anybody. I was going to remix it. I asked the Doors, hey, do you want me to remix this? And, Ray Manzarek, may he rest in heavenly peace, he said, yeah, go ahead. So Ray and John said, yeah, man. So, they said, but don't tell Bruce. He said, I have to tell Bruce. He said, don't tell Bruce, man. He'll get mad. So, I didn't. So I remixed it, and it sounded really good, but I didn't like it. I didn't like it. And then I told Mr. Botnick, I don't like it. And he said, well, I'm going to do it. And he didn't like his either. There's magic in the original. It happened when they made the Lido. It happened when they made the Lido. I could not really duplicate that sound. That level of compression on the left channel, during Light My Fire, during the guitar and organ solos on the right channel, that sound, that's a compressor chugging in and out. I could not get any of my stuff to do that. And apparently neither could old Bruce. So we used the Lido and patched it. And where the actual original is, I don't know, but it was never used to cut a record. So it's not a master. It is just a work part. And I don't know where it is. And I would have tried to use it. That would have been really good. But you see, I didn't know that the Lido was a Lido until years later, when Paul Rothschild said, oh, that's a Lido. And I said, what's a Lido? This is not the master. It says nothing on the box. There's no, that's the copy that they made in order to make a record that wouldn't have your stylus jump.
So that was an Elektra thing. I think they're the ones that came up with that acronym, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
So the age of analog is asking you, Steve Hoffman, can you give a couple examples of what you consider excellent original recordings, mixes, and mastering?
You mean on vinyl?
Go for it.
Wow. Out of my comfort zone here. A lot of obscure records that you never heard of. But this is primarily a rock and roll audience, right?
It's audiophile audience. It's everything. So, I mean, maybe give me one rock album, one jazz album. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Led Zeppelin 2, RL mastering. Jazz. Not very many. Maybe something on contemporary. Look, here's the thing. Everybody know how records are made, how they're cut. It's a compromise, it's all a compromise. You need to do certain things, or else your record's going to be 3 minutes long. You need to sum the bass so it's all coming out of the center, or your sides are going to be 3 minutes long. You need to have a high frequency compressor on the very tip top, or your head's going to blow up and your side's going to be 1 minute long. Once you compromise that, you can make a very good sounding phonograph record. Sometimes they went a little overboard. At contemporary, they went a little overboard. Their HF compressor was a little heavy on the on their early cuttings. Is that you making that noise, or is that me? Beep beep.
Might be me. I don't know. Probably me.
It's you.
The back. It's up there.
I mean, it's not distracting or anything.
Oh my God, it's annoying. Here's a question. Hang on. So we have this here. Are you still using audio note gear at home?
I am.
All
All audio note all the time. And, that was a revelation to me, Audio Note. I tried to get in the Audio Note room at the Consumer Electronics Show in the early 2000s, and it's really crowded in there, and I really couldn't get in, and it was a terrible sounding room, and I wanted to hear their gear, and finally we hooked up, and Peter of Audio Note, we met in person here in Los Angeles. We had a long evening of audio discussion, and the next thing I knew, I had all the gear I wanted, and I've been using it ever since, and it's absolutely wonderful. It helps me hear in, and when you can hear in, it makes everything sound much more lifelike. And that's the key, that 3D sound that vinyl gives you, that it's hard to get on anything else. Vinyl has this thing that envelops you, and the more you upgrade, the more it envelops you, until you hit that point, and then you're not upgraded anymore. Now it just starts to become this euphonic haze, and you lose the magic mid-range, and that's when you have to change something or stop upgrading. So what is my home vinyl equipment? Well, I have the Audio Note Turntable 3 and the Audio Note cartridge. I have the wonderful VPI Avenger that they kindly sent me a few years ago, and I have a VPI Classic also. And for playing 78s, I have an old Technics that was modified to play 78s by KAB. And my cartridges are the Grado Epoch, the mono Epoch and the stereo Epoch. I don't know what the list price is on those now. I think they're like $9 or $10 each or something. But John Grado and I have a mutual admiration society, and he sends me his new things, and I hook them in, and they all sound great. And phono preamplifier is in my Audio Note M9 preamp, so that's what I'm using. And my SUT is SUT. I hate that. SUT is also Audio Note. Does that help?
It does. I think that's Nicole had asked you. I love the Audio Note equipment, so there you go. Set up with that.
Me too. It's very expensive, and it's mainly for rich Russians and Asians, basically. That's who gets the most orders. But I love I love vacuum tubes. So I love a CD player that speakers, Audio Note speakers, A&E speakers, the top of the line Audio Note speakers. Also downstairs, I have a pair of 1968 Tannoy Lancasters, 15-inch monsters, just like they had at Abbey Road back then. And when you play something that was Abbey Road made back then, you can hear what they were hearing, and they sound so good. And they were $49 at the Goodwill, so that was a good deal. And I also have some LS35As. Would you consider? Yes, I would. I would consider that the second best cut. Look, the master of Led Zeppelin 2 is a very lackluster sounding tape. It was mixed at A&R in New York, where they did the Gets Gilberto album and Moondance, and just Led Zeppelin 2 sounds lackluster. In order to make that sound good, you need to EQ it. That's all it is extra EQ. Why don't you save yourself $500? Buy the old Atlantic CD of Led Zeppelin 1 or 2. Buy yourself a $100 5-band graphic equalizer. Make your own version. I guarantee you can match what they did. It's not genius. It's just they wanted it to sound good. So they cranked the 8K a little bit to sound good. They cranked the 3K to sound good. And you could do that also. Save your money.
What year of the CD you're talking about, you're suggesting? Does it matter?
Late 80s.
Okay.
The one that was originally released on Atlantic, Led Zeppelin #2. I remember I had Tom Port over at my house, and we were playing it through my old tannoys that used to be in my office, modern tannoys. And he said, "This stinks. This
That sounds like Tom.
these this is crap. These tannoys are crap." And I said, "Tom, you're listening to basically an uneq'd version of Led Zeppelin. You should be happy." It's like, "This is what it really sounds like." "I don't give a shit what it really sounds like. It's shit. Take it off. I don't want to hear it anymore." I said, "Wait." So I got my equalizer out and I said, "Wait, give me a minute." I'm screwing with the knobs. "Okay, try it now." "Yeah, that's it. It's just EQ, man. It's EQ. It's just someone's monitors said that it sounded good like this. Someone else's monitors said that it sounded good like this. That's why this is a fun hobby. So you can collect, because not everybody hears the same."
Microphones that Sinatra used, were they built for him custom?
Yes, they were. They were built for him, not specifically for him, but for his producer of Capitol Records, and where they remain to this day. And they are over there, and
Would they still use those microphones today? They're just sort of in storage.
Absolutely, they use them.
Yeah.
Well, not recently. They shut the place down, but up until a little while ago, absolutely, they use them all the time. Paul McCartney, he was in there 5 years ago. They were using them, and the ironic thing is when he left Capitol and he went over to Western United, they used this shitty microphone on him because they thought it made him sound the best. And so he went from this wonderful Neumann mic, to this overloady little cheap mic. But they made it work over there because of all the layers of vacuum tubes in the signal path. By the time it hit the tape, it sounded good.
So here's a question for you. I guess we will do a few more questions here. We'll answer a few more. Do you have? I mean, you've been doing
I'm on
this.
a roll. Go ahead.
I know you are. This is like it's a Steve Hoffman rant. I need to get one of these things. I got to make one up for you next time you're on now. But now, do you have any aspirations of doing this again? Going and mastering for a label or
I keep
doing it yourself? What are you doing?
I consult anonymously because they don't want anybody to know that I'm helping them out. But yeah, it's the major labels aren't really being cooperative in licensing things, and each of the majors, they have their own engineers and their own ways and their own ideas, and thank God we have Kevin Gray and Bernie and Chris and in the old days, all of our favorite mastering engineer was the one and only, the late Mr. Doug Sachs. He was the best. He had a touch that I tried to emulate, and he was the master, and he was the master. And I always wanted all my albums to sound like he would have done it. So now that he's gone, Mr. Gray is carrying it on. He hears like I hear. You're in very good hands with him.
Speaking of Mr. Gray, so him and Doug Sachs would have mastered and cut the 30th, which I think is a brilliant sounding album.
It is, and they had the actual original master tape sitting right there at RTI.
Yeah,
right there. What we got out of that? A new toilet seat, because Doug Sachs said, "This is the most uncomfortable toilet I've ever pooped on." So RTI in Camarillo had to go out and buy him a new comfy toilet seat so he could.
So Doug and Kevin, you worked in the original masters for the 30th anniversary Dark Side of the Moon cut. Amazing. It's an incredible album. I mean, now that's going to go up in value on Discogs now, Steve. You're making a run on the market here on that one.
The problem with that album is, you can make it sound good up to a point. It's like Abbey Road, Beatles Abbey Road. After a while, it stops improving. It is what it is. And, you're not really going to get anything else. What has to improve after that is your gear, your playback gear.
And we've talked about that today. Exactly.
More tubes, to make that, because that Abbey Road solid state sound, it's a good sound. Maybe I'm amazed, Paul McCartney, Dark Side of the Moon, but it's not, after a certain point, it's just there's nothing more that you can really do. But yeah, they nailed it.
They nailed it.
Yeah. Did you get your copy on blue vinyl?
No.
How many did they make of that?
I probably not very many.
20.
See, I didn't even know there was a blue vinyl, so that's something
Oh,
new.
yeah.
I did not know that. So there you go. So would that 30th anniversary be the Steve Hoffman go-to if you're to like wake up one morning and say I want to listen to some Dark Side? That's the one you're going to listen to? No, you're shaking your head.
No. Look, that's the one to get.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I don't wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to fire up my record player because now I got to get the record out, and I'll play the original EMI CD is what I will play on my $250,000, so I'm told, audio note CD playback. That's what I'll listen to. I can hear the LP if I want to, but in the morning I can't be bothered. It's too much.
You must not like the 45 RPM just because you have to get up every 10 to 12 minutes. You must hate that.
Well, I don't hate it. I mean, hell, I made 100 or at least 100 of them myself. It's just, when I was told that they're doing that Coltrane album on, I said, no, what? I Love Supreme? What are you going to do? Fade it out and then fade it back in again? Why would they do that? I couldn't understand that.
Well, there's a couple of Genesis songs on the Atlantic series, right? You have to go two different sides of that as well.
I mean, everybody says, well, sounds better at 45.
Well, there you go. There you go. There's a question.
33 versus 45. Now that was a pain in the ass album to cut. We got the original masters of that. No, I don't hate them. It's just, you get another 3 dB of headroom. Okay. You can open the groove a little wider. So if you're, that can be a positive and a negative depending on your cartridge. You want a wide groove? Is your needle gonna slide around in there? Usually the LP version is easier to track. The slower version is easier to track on the regular speed one. It's just easier to track. The louder we got, the harder it was. Even with the wide lead out groove, it's can overload fairly easily unless you have a really, really good cart. However, if you're cutting like a single or something, it's a great speed because you can really make it really, really loud. And I was always very careful, as is Mr. Kevin, to not go too loud, because if you go too loud, you're going to overload. There's going to be intergrooved, there's going to be intergroove problems. You could break the groove. And what was that again? I'm not snarky. I'm just, I'm going to save you guys some grief, heartache, and money. I mean, not everything sounds great at high speed. I mean, yes, I have a bunch, but
so you would choose a 33 over the 45 Rumors?
No, not necessarily. Okay. Not on that album. I love that album.
I have the 45 and I love it. I think it's fantastic.
We worked freaking hard on that album. That album was mixed simultaneously on 2 separate machines. So you got the A master and the B master, both first generation, both with weird edits and weird damage in separate places. We had to make one complete version of that. I don't think that album had been actually cut on a vinyl in many a year.
Well, Rumors as well, didn't they have to, because they wore the master tape out recording, didn't they actually have to go and use the backup to put Mick Fleetwood's drums back in? There's some story surrounding that as well.
I don't know how true that is. I've looked over the paperwork. Maybe, that was nothing compared to Asia, Steely Dan Asia. I can remember they were working on it over at MCA Whitney when I was in there one day, and oh my God, the multi-track of some song they were working on, was it Black? I don't know. It was so used, you could see the lines where the head gaps hit in the tape. It looked like candy cane. It was like unusable. It was just unusable. How many times can you listen to that over and over again? Obviously, that's when they decided that they were going to mix each section individually on the master tape.
I guess it's nice
Crazy,
that Bernie made a backup copy, so it could be
very lucky.
cut at 45 for UHQR. So that's what we're hearing there. It does
Although
sound good.
there's a copy floating around out there that I used, still out there, because I can see my handwriting on it. So that was a copy that they made for me at MCA Whitney of the original work part that was marked "Do Not Use." That is what I used when I worked on Asia, and someone's used it recently because it's in a photograph on my forum. So I was like, yeah, I remember that. Okay.
Do you know where do we find one of your old Asia mastered CDs? Is there a certain markings on it that people can see? Because it's been debatable. I've read through a lot of the threads on your forum, and it gets confusing.
I was sent my copy by, was it Mal? Someone on my forum sent me. I didn't have one. Why would I keep one of those? I didn't know. It was like, okay, I'm done with this. On to the next one. I didn't put my name on any of those because I wasn't the original mastering engineer. They had to have their name on it. So I don't know what it looks like. It was the earliest looking one. It had the earliest catalog number on it. That's the only way that I can.
So that would be an 83 Asia MCA CD.
It would be an 83 Asia MCA CD. It would have, some of those were later repackaged on it, said on the back, the plaid price or the nice. Some of them. You can't always trust what the CD is compared to what the artwork is. They mix them all up somehow. So it's, and not only on Asia, it's very confusing. Like on Springsteen, Born to Run, they mixed them all up. The records were in the, anyway.
Now, I was going to ask you this. So the Steely Dan, the Citizen Dan box set that Glenn Meadows mastered, I always felt that sounded a little bit louder than maybe some of the other cuts out there. I don't know if you ever had a chance to listen to that box, but it is. Yeah.
The only ones I actually heard on CD were the ones that Roger worked on. Decade, and Roger was like, Roger and I would argue on the phone almost every day. What are you doing to my albums? I said, Roger, I've added 1/2 of a dB at 3,000 cycles. It needs, there's a giant hole in the mid range. You need to add that in there to make it sound good for people who don't have giant Altec monitors. And he said, send everything to me. So when we send it all to him, and when it all came out, it was all just straight. There was no EQing whatsoever. So everything sounded hollow again. So I'm like, Oh my God. Right. That was the sound that he liked. And what a great engineer he was, though, wasn't he?
The immortal.
My God. Just, some of those things sound so good for what they were at the time that they were made. But he was a real pain in the butt. I wish he was here right now. I'd love to argue with him again. Hey, Roger, he said, what do you want now? I said, what are you going to do with Katie Lice? I'm using the EQ dub. I'm not going through that crap again. I said, don't use the EQ dub. You don't have a DBX encoder, man? He said, no, why would I have a DB? I hate them. So
there you go.
He was a good guy. Okay.
Couple more questions. Trevor asked, does Steve have a view on unsampling from 16-bit to 24-bit in high res?
Completely useless.
There you go. I somehow knew you were going to say that.
Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to upsample something? You're just adding nothing. Why would you want to also, just making friends wherever I go. Why would you want to buy a phonograph record that's not analog? That's all I'll say about that.
There you go.
For what purpose?
Well, there you go. You know what? We're going to leave it at that. It's been, we went way over time. I actually, when we were texting back and forth the last little while, you promised an hour and you gave me an hour and almost an hour and a half. So I do appreciate that.
We've been yakking that long.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I think if you enjoy, I hopefully you enjoyed this in this format as well. I will take you up on your offer. If you want to listen to my UHQR Asia, I would love to for you to hear
Sure.
that.
Okay. Be happy
Yeah.
to.
And then you got to promise me you got to come back on the show as one of the panelists on my larger roundtable, and we'll have a huge discussion on that. Would that be a deal? Everyone's listening right now, so you gotta.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't mind that. I mean, you know, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Happy holidays, guys. Thank you, everyone, for
everybody.
watching. Happy New Year. Thank you so much. Thank you, Steve.
You're very welcome.